trust. Welcome everyone on Zoom and welcome back everyone in person. So happy to have you here for these two wonderful featured readings. And we're going to start with Rhonda, our opener. Yay, Rhonda! So Rhonda Ganz, Frequent Small Loads of Laundry, one of my favorite titles for a book ever, won the Relit Award for poetry. It was a finalist for the Dorothy Livesay Poetry Prize and the Victoria Butler Book Prize. Her poems are in the Malahat Review, Rattle, Room, Harvard Design Magazine, On City Buses via Poetry in Transit, and anthologies including Sweetwater, Poems for the Watersheds, Poems from Planet Earth, Horsfield, 77 Women Poets of BC, and Voicing Suicide. She reads crime fiction, watches Judge Judy, and needlefelts fancy hearts in the Victoria home she shares with a quiet man and two young cats who amuse themselves by knocking things over. I highly recommend you follow her cats on Instagram. Come on up, Rhonda.
I know I had to change my cat bio because we just got these cats 6 weeks ago. So they're very young and very friendly and very exciting to be in the same house with. Okay, is that about the right place? So I'm thrilled to be here. I haven't been here in a while. Lovely to see new readers and new faces. And I'm so happy to be reading with Evelyn. I was trying to think, probably 1993, there was a house party just between Granville and Burrard. And I know Sukin Lee was there. I don't remember who else, but that's where we met the first time. And we've just kind of gone like this. And read Evelyn's novel and her other writing too, not just her poetry, because she's been writing a long time and knows what she's doing. So I wrote some new stuff. I didn't finish my murder poem. It's not the perfect murder poem yet, so you'll get to hear it some other time. But these are all really new. Swoon. Sometimes when I faint, I fall back like a plank. Sometimes I crumple like a Victorian seamstress, midwinter in a too tight corset, holding her breath to stop her cold fingers shaking as she hems a cuff. Sometimes when you exit the room, I blow a kiss at your back. Sometimes I flip you the bird, mid-bicker in a too tight marriage suit, gritting my teeth to stop my cold heart skipping out to call your bluff. I wrote this little short one. I wrote a bunch of short poems one year during the pandemic in the month of August, the postcard poem project, poem a day. And you mail it off on a postcard to people. So I guess this is fitting that there's a coronation this weekend too. It was a postcard of a London street scene, but really old, you know, from the 14 or 1500s. It was old wooden buildings. The street that knew plague knows plague once more. People stay home. The clock slows down. The king says eating a car is the cure. And just like that, everyone's eating cars, learning to walk again. Oh. Cream, no sugar, exactly 51 degrees Celsius. My house is filled with strange men. Two of them are named Brandon. One is painting the hallway. One is fixing the lock on the patio door. One is twisting a snaky thing down the kitchen drain. There are more strange men outside. One up a ladder cleaning gutters. One hammering a fence rail. One out checking the shed for rats. For sure, one's called Joshua. Look, I get that an hourly rate can replace most of you. I'm a little bit glad when these serviceable men disperse. But tell me, where do I rent a lap the cat will actually sleep on? Who do I hire to bring me a stone from their beach walk just because they know I'd like its hue? What will it cost me for a knock-knock joke so corny I choke on the morning coffee I've paid yet another sad invitation to try and make it the way you used to? to mother's home. I was beautiful once, the morning I stopped listening to my mother. I was oddball horse, pelican wing, hobbled, I danced the cha-cha, lopsided, I flew. At dinner tonight, we saw two eagles mating. I've never seen that before. Two bald eagles over the water, right over the harbor, and they did that thing where they flew up into the air and then twisted in these insane circles upside down and trying to mate in the air. It was phenomenal. I'd never seen that before. My legs weren't strong enough for the Olympic Games. Wasn't sportsmanlike enough either. I did fly to Pamplona one summer, though, for the running of the bulls. After the wounds healed, I couldn't have children. So I collect dolls. They're quiet. After I die, they won't grumble about their lack of inheritance. I had an arrangement with a novelist across the alley. He'd let me string a laundry line from his third-floor window to mine, and after the clothes were dry and folded, I'd tie a little box of patisserie to the line and reel it over as thanks for the favor. One day I was missing a pair of socks, another day a flannel shirt, then my favorite skirt. He invited me over to collect them. I brought Chianti. He named a character after me. So sorry for your loss. The day you die, customer service shows up in person with an update to my wellness tracker. Once inserted, I'm told it can never be removed. A crude incision on the inside of my wrist. I'm told the scar it leaves will diminish. The tracker measures hours spent in bed awake, but unable to get out of bed. It measures days since I last showered. Measures how many minutes I hold a fake smile. Measures how many times I lie and say I'm fine. The update measures liquid volume expressed as tears, measures the angle of contracture, shallow breathing as I fold into myself. This update lets me personalize my specific sorrow. I can give my grief a nickname, set reminders to stop crying. The device will ping when I've used up 90% of my sobs. SSFYL-2023. A humdrum label on the box. So sorry for your loss. Mad burn of the scalpel, more blood than I expect. The tracker shoved deep next to the bone. There is no anesthetic offered. No anesthetic for me ever again. So I'm told. I'm going to read one from the book. And I think I'm going to read the one Evelyn was on the committee that picked my poem for poetry in transit. So I will read that one. And for you. This is for my parents, Ben and Viola Ganz. Incommunicado. My parents practice being dead. I mean, they sail away on cruises, 10 days here, a couple weeks there. And even though they take an iPad, even though they've got a pay-as-you-go cell phone, Dad's too cheap to pay cruise ship Wi-Fi extortion. So it's radio silence till they find a hotspot in some cafe on shore. Till then, they say, it'll be like when we're dead and your loudest wail won't reach us. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Rhonda. That was wonderful. Oh, so good. Okay, really happy to introduce our featured reader of the evening, Evelyn Lau. Evelyn Lau has authored 9 volumes of poetry and received the Milton Acorn People's Poet Award, the Pat Lowther Award, and a National Magazine Award, as well as nominations for a BC Book Prize and the Governor General's Award. Oh, Her poems have appeared in hundreds of journals and anthologies, including the Best Canadian Poetry series. And I always like to hunt down a quote of some kind. I found this one in an interview with Emma Skagen for Malahat Review, and I just found it so incredibly relatable. She said, much of writing poetry seems to be getting ready to write, going for long walks, reading other poets, staring into space. When the writing begins, the first draft comes out in a panicky gush. I'm terrified of losing the mood, followed by days or weeks or months of revisions. I walk around downtown muttering to myself, utterly absorbed in an internal debate on line breaks, word choices. It's painful to pull away from the poem to attend to work or other obligations. After so many years, I do know when the poem is done. There's a finality to it, a sense of having reached its limit, though from time to time I'll revisit it months later, realize it wasn't finished at all. I rarely scrap a poem since countless hours of excruciating effort have gone into the drafts, so we'll rescue at least a fragment. There's always something worth saving, even if it's just one line. Isn't that relatable? So please welcome Evelyn Lau.
Thank you, Zoe, and thank you to everyone for being here tonight. It's such a great pleasure to be among other poets. I was thinking about that as I was preparing my reading, and how often, when the rare times that we poets read to non-poets, it isn't often. I think we tend to dumb down a bit because we're not sure, what will, if they actually get what we're doing. So to know that, here's an audience who gets what each other is doing is really fantastic. The opening mic was one of the best I have heard. I mean, the voices were just so individual and engaging. And Rhonda, to read with you after all of these years, and I feel like my brain is sparkling with your wit, and that wit kind of interleaved with grief and depth. I just, how do you do that? You have such an amazing voice and style that's really unique, that just shone through in that book, in that first book. So I can't wait for the next one. Yeah, just wonderful. And Zoe, thank you for organizing. And the fact that this is a weekly series is beyond me. The few times I've ever organized anything, I was like, how does anybody do this? Like, it's not easy, right? I mean, anything that can go wrong will. So thank you for doing this from all of us. So the poems I picked, yes, I thought were maybe a little more relatable to poets than the poems that I would typically read. And now I am debuting my reading glasses because I'm getting to that age. And at some point I'll be hanging them around my neck like an old librarian. So that happens. At it for a long time. Okay, fallow. So if you write long enough, you start to write about not writing. Fallow. Then came the weeks you waited for words, but they never arrived. You scoured the shoreline, hauled up handfuls of seaweed and sand, raked an abacus of small stones. You hacked through grasses and reeds, waded a field of mud, hands plunging its sucking surface for a glint of silver. You squatted and stared at yourself, weird mole, fuzz, skin tag. Was this wasted time, these middle years, tilling the landscape between frenzy and idleness? He was wise, the old psychiatrist. He foretold the family you left behind would follow you into your dotage, their dream avatars permanently younger than you, haloed in a harvest gold light. Now, nearly everyone you've loved is gone. The world slides, its surfaces unstable, a flash of distraction, ogling that owl on its tree branch, and you're splayed on the ground, blinking at the ceiling of steel blue sky. There's a pressure inside your brain, a slow leak between hemispheres, swelling. Weeks, then months of apocalyptic silence, blank scrolls wedged into bottles, the ink sea. When I look back at my younger life, I think what I have wrestled with more than anything, is a difficulty with controlling my emotions. And maybe that, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? What draws us to poetry? Is it this kind of, emotional oversensitivity to everything around us? Or does the poetry encourage that? Because of course it encourages paying attention to even the smallest things, which can be painful. Anyway, this is a small poem called Control. Remember the magnolia tree beneath the bridge, the first to bloom. There were days we passed each other on opposite sides of that bridge. Some mornings I watched for you like the heron in his dust overcoat, the seal nudging the surface of the shore. Chalk architecture, blinding blank sky. From the start, I wanted to say, look at me. You thought so little of me that of course I craved more. My ceaseless hunger and embarrassment, a spill of emotion like sewage into water, like something private curdling the air, a cold sore raw on a girl's lip, a menstrual blotch left on a public seat. Feminine, ugly, shameful, like need. If you read this, you would say, control yourself, your face gone hard as a shield. Wow. This is Asian Heritage Month, and so I wanted to read these two poems that are a tribute to my old friend and mentor, Jim Wong Chu. I noticed in previous visits to Victoria, I don't know if it's still here, but during the pandemic, this was our getaway. And I noticed there was one of his poems in Fantan Alley in Chinatown. So it was kind of like, hi there, Jim, when I passed under the poem. This is called Stuck for Jim Wong Chu in ICU. When the doors open, the smell of the hospital overpowers you. A stew of blood and urine, hand sanitizer, latex gloves, blue bags of medical waste toppling off the janitor's cart to loll at your feet. Reek of sour flesh, clogged catheters, sweat-drenched sheets and pillows. It coats your clothes, clogs the fine hairs in your nose and ears, clings to your skin when you reach for him. He's cold, clammy. His body a doll's in the cotton gown polka-dotted with blood, his one open eye unable to follow you around the room. You sit in what you hope is his field of vision, the one brown eye that maybe sees you, maybe not, his mind a mystery after the stroke. The nurse mistakes you for his daughter. The machine he's hooked up to blinks blood pressure and pulse rate, says he's alive. He's pale yellow and slack as a steamed pudding. Later in the cafeteria, you treat yourself to something sweet to mask the nausea that throbs in your throat at the thought of them suctioning his lungs, plunging the raw wound of his tracheotomy. A strawberry parfait, glob of custard and whipped cream so thick it clumps on your tongue, sharp spears of fruit glazed in syrup. It sticks in your throat. Now, the second poem is called The Fewest Hours of Sunlight on Record. And, the conversation these days is always about the weather, but we were walking around the breakwater today and I'm going, bloody hell, this is May, like it feels like an insult to be pouring rain and cold and windy. But this was from another May a few years ago, which also wasn't not very good. So Fewest Hours of Sunlight on Record. When you said you were thinking of leaving, the skies opened. Reedy, gulping trees surged outside the windows, rushing in titanic wind. Black smell of wet earth, pang of metal. Of course, I said, it makes sense. One of the coldest winters on record, then one of the wettest springs. Who would want to stay? Along the sidewalk, canopies sagged like soaked sails, busted umbrellas displayed in gutters and doorways. This was May. That night, I went to see Jim in neurology. Snap of latex gloves, cap and gown protocol to ward off infection. View of the parking lot, though he would never drive again. Never order chicken's feet and taro cakes again. Call hours before a grant deadline to say, I'm so stressed I feel like I'm going to have a stroke. His face drooped into the hospital pillow, head heavy as a milk-drunk infant's, while he ate his dinner, nutrients pumping steadily through his stomach until the machine beeped and blinked. Feeding completed. Later I said, I will miss you. What I didn't say was that some days I already did, craving something I couldn't name. Even here, even now, Jim cradling my finger in his loose fist, breathing on his own. A number of the poems in this collection are about a relationship I had when I was in my 20s and has kind of haunted my, well, it's cast a long shadow over my life because it was with another writer, a much older man who then took legal action against me for a piece I'd written about him. And that for many years made me question my own work and the intentions behind it, which is deadly, really. I mean, we have so many kind of demons, I think, when it comes to wondering about the quality of our work. And then to have that added stressor really kind of killed my prose writing. But I found more of a home in poetry as a result, which has been a mixed blessing. Many fewer readers, let's put it that way. But it's been an interesting exploration to see how you can explore some of the same things you would in prose in poetry and do so in many ways more fearless way. But because of the sheer fact that it's a poem and that, you know, many people don't put it under the same microscope as they would with nonfiction. So these were the two poems I wrote after he died, and they were, well, among a series of other poems that makes up the last half of this book, really, or last third of this book. And the emotions were so powerful at that point that the only way I could contain them was by writing in a form. And I've usually avoided, even though I have my own structure going on in my head, I've avoided actual forms in poetry. And this is the ABCDarian form, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with which every line begins with the letter of the alphabet from A to Z. And let me tell you right away, don't attempt this if you don't know what your X line is going to be, because you'll just give up at that point. So this is my pair of ABCDarians that I wrote after hearing about his death. The first one's called After, an ABCDarian, with a closing line by Emily Dickinson. After his death, I thought the words would break out of me like hoarded light. They'd been cloistered for 20 years, strangled by claims of defamation that attended the end. But now everything was over. The lies, the humiliations, the fucking, I could even write about that. Those red-haired girls he worshipped, those hobbled angels he paid, not for intercourse, which he'd always considered just too much effort, but for the endless suckling, the endless kneeling down. See, even writing this, loathing curdles in my throat, my stomach squeezes and sours. They say without forgiveness, it's never over. This self-torture goes on, seeping like slow poison into your veins. They say you can decide that quick, just let it go. Concentrate on how he tried. Remember the yellow roses he bought by the bucketful, summers spent jetting here and there, islands and resorts others would envy. Unless they weren't willing to pay that price or play victim, some nights abuser. Now I can write closer to truth, without amputation, without calling him X. Now his name won't spark a lawsuit, gossip, years of insomnia, but the fear still penetrates, zero at the bone. So the second ABCDarian I've written in his imagined voice, and it's called Anger, his ABCDarian. Anger drove you to write what you did. Don't pretend otherwise, you dull bitch. You tried to hurt me.
I hit back harder. Still, I remember Cuba, that disaster, how you never complained despite the heat, the mosquitoes, the room that flooded after every shower. The rotten burger on the beach that made you sick for weeks. I remember the gifts you gave, leather gloves, fancy chocolates, embossed journals, hoping to surprise and delight. For a time, I wanted to give you the globe, but you were jealous. You scoured those journals, needed to know every detail. I confided about past lovers, hundreds of them, even told you about the men, that cab driver I followed home, that man who sat next to me in the porn theater, those illicit encounters obliterated from the narrative of wives, children. People said to stay away. You were damaged, praised. Why did you question everything? We could have traveled the length of Route 66 across America, crossing off state after state, the way I did with my third wife. Oh, too late, I learned you hated following in my ex's footsteps. I didn't understand, refused to censor my past. Maybe in the end, I was victorious. Maybe you. The truth is, neither of us wrote much after that. I defended you when your work was called X-rated, disgusting. I bought you yellow roses, gold-filled pens, almost a diamond ring. The zenith was those months when you might have said yes.
Oh.
I think I'll read two more, and one, okay, the one is from, also about that relationship, from the present day. It's called Burnt. There was a fire in your former home. It was on the news. On the ground floor, a Greek restaurant, scorched and soaked, second and third stories engulfed. The room where you once wrote, a black mouth open to the sea. I walked past the ruins on Easter Sunday, spooning mango gelato from a waffle cone, along with the other sun seekers after a record month of rain. Children zigzagged past in a daze of pleasure. Old women shuffled in glittering saris. Tourists held up cell phones to the mile-long train carting its load of coal. You brought me here once in my youth where nothing impressed me. The buildings on the beach too faded to charm, paint flaking, balconies rusting from salt air. I liked shiny and new, black leather, smoked glass. It was the 90s. Grimaced as you crept up the side stairs, hand on rail, your careful old man's gait rousing my disgust. You wanted to share this relic of your former life, the lair where you'd written your famous books. It was your ex-wife's by then, of course. It still smells like home, you said, when you unlocked the door. I wandered through modest rooms strewn with pillows, sticky with your past. Every surface scratched with sand, the air moist, personal, clogged with intimate history. Your desk at the window overlooked the beach. Look at the wonderful view, you said, but it was a gray day, the tide far out on a stretch of wet beach where a few forlorn seabirds staggered. All of it was dumpy. I couldn't wait to leave. Now it was burnt up like so much else, and I was walking past in my middle age, partner at my side. I looked up at your room and then away, as if from the scene of an accident. Blown out windows gaped open, blasted and gone. He and I walked along the pier, the warmth of the sun crowding our faces, our exposed necks. Later, we would go for fish tacos and laugh at how he tried not to notice the teenage waitress, blonde and blue-eyed, still baby-faced. I've lost track of time. One more? Two more? How am I doing?
One more.
Okay. I'll do something from my the book before. This is a poem I wrote for my poetry students, and I think most people who are drawn to poetry are really lovely, gentle, kind people, who have a great
respect for even the smallest things in the world, including earthworms, which is what this poem is called. And I traumatized my students because I wanted to write something very different about the pleasure of cruelty. As a sort of antidote to all this kindness. I'm just a perverse person. I always have to I think they call it, they have a word for it with kids. It's like oppositional defiance disorder. Yeah, I think I should suffer from that. So this is earthworms. I used to chop them up as a child, I confessed to the room full of poetry students, expecting collusion. Weren't all children cruel? But their dismayed faces said no. We had just read a poem about earthworms, scrawled in the hundreds across the sidewalk after a deluge, the poet stepping gingerly among the stranded creatures. Again, I saw myself crouched on the pavement, penknife poised above a meaty tangle, halving, quartering, wondering when the worms would stop regenerating, if that was a myth anyway, nearly weeping with the power I wielded. In my mother's garden, I observed the heave of a slug's body sprinkled with salt, a spider's 8 legs cringing under a cloud of insecticide, the satisfying crunch of a snail's whirled house underfoot, the destruction of that architecture like the snap and crackle of shells on a beach. The students' upturned faces, trusting me with their fragile words. What would they think of the shining hours I spent by the balcony doors, torturing flies? Watching their frantic skitter up the glass as my scissors flashed over their intricate bodies, snipping away a gossamer wing, a quivering leg. I'm not talking a shameful episode or two after being scolded or spanked. This was a private hobby in the slow hours of summer, a kind of heaven to inhabit a time outside of time, a bubble of pure concentration. How lovely.